Today, we are talking about how to be a research rock star and how to leverage research in your business so you make smarter decisions. My guest today is Kathryn Korostoff. I'll tell you more about her in a second, so stay tuned.
Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we feature top entrepreneurs, business leaders, and thought leaders and ask them how they built key relationships to get where they are today. Now, let's get started with the show.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corkin here. I'm the host of this show, and you know, because you've probably listened to previous episodes, that every week I talk to smart CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs from all kinds of different companies, especially inside of Entrepreneurs Organization, which is how I connected with today's guest. But we've had Netflix, Kinko's, YPO, EO, Activation Blizzard, Grubhub, LendingTree. Go check out the archives. Lots of great episodes for you in there. And of course, this episode brought to you by Rise25, where we help B2B businesses get clients, referrals, and strategic partnerships with Done For You podcasts and content marketing. And you can learn about what we do and how we do it at rise25.com. All right. And my guest here is Kathryn Korostoff. She is the President and Lead Instructor at Research Rockstar Training and Staffing. She's had a couple of different companies, exited one business, got another one now. We're going to talk about her background over the last 2 decades of working within the research field and helping to provide people services to companies in different ways. We've got some interesting metaphors for you. And Kathryn, I love to start people off by asking them a little bit more about what they were like as a kid. And you said that you didn't do lemonade stands or paper routes, but babysitting, nanny jobs, that was kind of what you fell into as a kid in order to make a buck. So tell us about it.
Yeah, I mean, that was definitely my low-hanging fruit as a young woman, being, starting probably from age 10 or 11, started with the babysitting jobs, ended up getting a couple of live-in babysitting kinds of jobs during summers between school. I don't really think of it so much as entrepreneurship at that stage, only because I think at that point in time was more just like how to get spending money. Right. But it was definitely a good experience because any kind of work experience starts to get you skilled in how to serve your client and how to keep your client happy. It's just that my clients were the parents.
Now, not all that early experience was boring. It's going to get a little bit more spicy, pun intended, because you started a mail order hot sauce company after that?
No, I didn't actually start it. It was one of my first concepts that I tried to develop, but I never actually executed on it. I was one of those people in high school and college who was just always dreaming about business ideas. I'd see a need or I had a need. And I was always like, somebody should have a product that does this, or maybe I could have a service that does that. And I became obsessed with hot sauce. I still love hot sauces. And at the time, this is going back a lot of years now. This was
a lot more choices in hot sauce now than we did even 20 years ago, right?
Yeah. And now there are all these websites now where you can go where they have hundreds of kinds of
back
hot
then
sauces.
you couldn't. And then you live in New England also too, which probably I imagine that you didn't have as many options for hot sauces.
Yeah, I mean, definitely back then you were a little bit more restricted in your geographic area. And when you wanted to sell, it was all mail order catalog. That was, we're talking about the 70s, and that was all mail order catalog businesses. We used to get the giant Sears catalog couple times a year.
Did they have a hot sauce section? I don't remember one.
No, but just about everything else.
Yeah, that's true.
They were like the Amazon before Amazon.
God, I gotta find one of those on eBay and give it to my kids and be like, this is what the internet, this is what, before Amazon, this is what we had. It would come once a year and that's what you got. Yeah. So I can see how you were drawn to a profession where you are compensated for researching because you just have like a natural curiosity to you. Is that accurate?
Yeah. And I love that you picked up on curiosity because it's interesting. Now I'm running a company where we're, working very closely with the people who are leading the market research and customer insights teams, very often in Fortune 100 companies. And when I talk to those team leaders about what are the skills they need for their team members, a lot of the basic hard skills are obvious. They have to know statistics, or they have to know about how to conduct qualitative research interviews, or they have to be able to write or present. But it's some of those softer skills like instilling curiosity. That's really what makes you excellent in this kind of work. And some people have it and some people just don't. They just don't think of all the questions that might come up. Somebody states a observation about the market or the target market or product trends or whatever, and you need to be the person who's saying, I wonder what's really driving that, or I wonder what levers I can pull to see whether or not, that really is true.
Right. And so you didn't launch the hot sauce company, but you did launch Sage Research, which started in 1993. An interesting thing about this, your first real company, was one, how you started it, which is similar to how I got into entrepreneurship, which was that I looked around, I was working within a law firm in my case, and I was like, well, I can do this on my own. I don't need to be doing this for them. And that's what happened with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I that's something I hear from a lot of people who go into services, especially like I'm in B2B services or legal services, professional services, because when it comes to services businesses, we are the product. The people are the product. And so if you are working in a services business and all of the clients are loving you and you're busting your butt and you're working a lot of hours and delivering the most excellent product, but somebody else or the entity is getting most of the profit and most of the recognition, that definitely is enough to make somebody say, I think I'm going to go hang out my own shingle and see if I can do this on my own and following my own decisions about what I should be investing in and the best use of my time.
Yeah. And you started this in 1993 and had it for about 12 years. And naturally, you started at that time because you saw there was this big .com boom that was swinging an upward. I'm joking, of course, like no one could have seen exactly how big it was, but it was amazing timing. You're starting it just during this like swell, the go-go 90s of, companies are hiring and this whole .com boom was happening.
It was dumb luck, John. It couldn't have been, it was ridiculous how dumb luck it was, because my early career had been in market research for tech companies. So I was doing market research in the telecom world. This was before the internet. So I was doing market research on things that you probably haven't even heard of, like X25 and Frame Relay and ATM. And so, but that got me in kind of the right neighborhood, because all of the companies and the thought leaders that were in those spaces were the ones who ended up being the thought leaders and the leaders in the initial, launch, frankly, of the whole internet industry. So I was really in the right place at the right time. And also nobody was bringing in my two areas of interest. When I started my company, Sage Research, as a full service research agency from the get-go, was specializing in serving tech companies, telecom companies, especially. Nobody else was doing that. Most market research companies at that time were really focused on serving CPG companies. They were doing market research on shampoo, not on data centers and IT trends.
Yeah. Now, at what point did the actual tools that the internet provide change the way that you did the research? Because I think a lot of those tools didn't develop for a while and in many cases, many years later.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. When I first had my agency, believe it or not, back then, a lot of our data collection was by paper, literally sending out letters, having people complete surveys and mail them back to us in a, stamped envelope that we provided. And also, of course, by telephone data collection. And there were focus groups and in-depth interviews and qualitative research too, but a lot of the bigger business was frankly in survey research. And so when the internet came out and now we could do online surveys, of course, that changed the industry fundamentally. And there are definitely parallels between that revolution and now the revolution with AI, because in both cases, the technology came in that was not only automating certain things and streamlining certain things that had been part of the process for a long time, but it fundamentally changed some of the cost structures of running those types of businesses. So it was a very, very fundamental change. But it was interesting. There were definitely, whenever there's a new technology trend, there were a lot of my competitors were kind of hand wringing and worried about, this is going to, ruin market research. Now that there's online surveys, it's going to ruin market research. And there were certainly some legitimate initial concerns, but I don't know. I've always been sort of like, I always want to see what's next,
Yeah,
and,
I know you're really excited about AI now, so I imagine that was your same approach to the internet back then.
Yeah, we were absolutely. So even though we were a fairly small research agency, I think at the largest I had 16 employees. We were always like the first ones that were using the latest software.
Now, during that time period, of course, we had 9/11, we had the bursting of the dot-com bubble. What was that experience like for you and for your company?
It was definitely a change. We were somewhat in good shape because of some of our, we just had some amazing clients that were really, really large, that I don't want to say that their business hadn't been affected, but I think that if a lot of our clients had been smaller businesses, it probably would have affected us more. And, I definitely know a lot of people who were in B2B services whose companies nearly or entirely went out of business during that time period. I was very lucky. I had some amazing clients who were very loyal to us, who were giving us very big contracts, and that helped. The other thing is that I am just frugal by nature. So during the boom, some of my competitors were signing these huge, lease contracts, and they were decorating their offices, and everybody was getting the fancy $500 office chairs and getting art, and like real art for the walls and all of that. And I never drank any of that Kool-Aid. I just was like, I'm not spending my money like that. So even when things did tighten up a bit, we were in a great position cash-wise.
Yeah. And then eventually you sell the company to another company that wanted you for your technology practice. So were you burnt out, or how did, what motivated that?
So one of my problems is sometimes I see the future, but I see it too soon. And so at that point, I was looking to sell my research agency because I could see that the research agency industry was starting to become more commoditized as new software and tools were coming in that made it easier for anybody to do online surveys or different types of statistical analysis. It really created just, the barriers to entry were low. Suddenly we had all these competitors, the price competition was getting fierce. And I found myself competing with much larger companies for $20,000 contracts. And I'm like, this is not fun anymore. This is, this industry, the market research agency business is really becoming commoditized. And it was true, it was happening, although it took several more years before it really happened.
Yeah.
Dramatically.
Yeah.
But in any case, at least I got out early. And it actually was a really great learning experience, going through a transaction and, talking to different potential buyers and going through the valuation and, due diligence negotiations and processes. But ultimately it turned out to be the company that I did end up selling to, it ended up being a really great fit. In fact, all these years later, 4 of my key employees from back then are still at that company.
Wow. And you'd become a member of EO, Entrepreneurs Organization, and your forum was really helpful as you went through that process, you said.
Yeah, the EO forum experiences have always been amazing, both in my first round of being in EO back then and coming back more recently. My forum back then was just perfect. Like, we just had people from different industries, but a lot, some of them had already had some transactions. And so there was just so much candid knowledge sharing. And sometimes, and John, maybe you've had this experience too, like in your own life, your personal life, other people who own businesses. But sometimes the scale of the businesses are different. The processes are different. I found that with my forum, and I think because of the EO requirements for joining EO, everybody was of a minimum scale so that they could really, have experiences to share with me that were really relevant and applicable and real world, as opposed to somebody who's maybe read an article about negotiating transactions, which is great, but that's not what I'm looking for. Right.
And then how was it going from running your own company to being an employee again?
Well, I did have an earnout as part of it was about a third of my valuation was in an earnout. And I'm sure that you've heard this many times.
Probably know what's coming.
I did not enjoy it. It was really hard for me to come to an organization where really awesome people, like I'm still friends with some of the people there, and a really good organization. But it was really hard for me to give up control of some basic sales and marketing decisions. And I will say that one thing that when I have a transaction again, I now will know to be way more precise about what kinds of sales and marketing investments need to be made for me to be able to meet my goals.
Right, because what often happens is you're kind of hamstrung, like you are the company can dictate, the company that acquires you can dictate the way you do sales and marketing, but then you have to hit a certain number in order to earn an earnout. And it's like, well, if I can't control this, then how am I going to hit my earnout?
Yep. And basically I went from I'd had 2 salespeople. And so to basically go to a situation where now I'm sharing salespeople and their expectations of their work are very different than my expectations, I ended up having to do a lot of my own sales. Now, ultimately, I beat my earnout goals. So in fact, the owner of the company that bought it, or one of the owners, had actually complained at one point about writing me all these big checks. So it wasn't that it ended up hurting me. It's just that it made it a very
happy
painful
period. Wasn't a happy period for you. Yeah. So,
really,
and a couple of years later, you end up starting another company. This is your company to today, Research Rockstar. What motivated that, and how did you decide to do it differently?
When I did the earnout for a couple of years, and when I realized I was just like, I was done, I really need to move on. One of the things that I was really, really aware of was that I had developed, I was very fortunate. I had developed a very high-end network within my profession. I knew a lot of the leaders of market research and customer insights and customer analytics functions at really big companies, both consulting companies and also at big brands. And so I really knew, like, I have this amazing network in a very specific niche. It's a very niche space, but I really know people here. And I always had people who really appreciated my helping them understand how to do things best. I was always very eager to explain to people why we were doing a certain methodology, why, if you do the methodology, if you have these steps in your methodology, you're going to get much better quality data. And I was always really passionate about that. And at the same time, when I'd had my previous company, anytime I wanted to send any of my employees for professional development, that was in the days where professional development meant, like going to some, hotel in Illinois, middle of nowhere, Illinois for 3 days and getting a binder this big and, being in a hot, stuffy room with 50 other people. And, there's fluff. And
not the best experience.
No, it was horrible.
Yeah.
And so when I was getting ready to figure out what did I want to do next, e-learning had already started to come to a lot of professions. It just hadn't come to market research and customer insights yet. And I decided I was going to do it, even though I knew nothing. I had no direct experience with e-learning at all. But back then it was in the early days. And I was always fairly technical and into trying platforms. And even back then there was some cool software. So that's why I decided to take my network, take my subject matter expertise and use it to solve the problem of boring training for people who are looking to advance their career.
And digitally, right? Or online, before the pandemic. So you look like a wizard.
Right. Because then the pandemic comes so I was the only one. And to this day, actually, we still have the largest catalog of e-learning courses for the market research and customer insights profession. But back then we were the only one doing e-learning. And then there was one other company that started doing e-learning, but it was literally, they had you read a textbook and then come online and do online quizzes. It wasn't the video content and online interactive content and these and, instructor interactions that were online, all the cool stuff that you can do with e-learning.
Right. And also for this company, you eventually figured out how to develop kind of 2 sides of the coin, so to speak. I actually love your analogy for it. You said, we want to sell umbrellas and sunscreen so that if it's a rainy day, I've sold you an umbrella. If it's a sunny day, I've sold you sunscreen. So explain a little bit how you structured the company so it has 2 sides of one coin.
Yeah. So we started in the e-learning business and that was going really well. And I was very, again, I had a good network. So we had some really amazing early clients that were, basically running their market research and insights teams through our training to upskill. And then I started to get clues from some of my clients that even though they were training their team members to do certain things through us, sometimes they just needed somebody to come in and do that one task. So it wasn't that they necessarily wanted to outsource their market research, but they might want to out-task a specific aspect of it for a short period of time. And so I ended up getting into the staffing business. And not permanent placement so much, but really like temporary staffing, like you need somebody for your one of your market research managers is going to be on maternity leave for 3 months, or you've got some big projects coming in, and you don't want to hire more full-time staff, but you definitely need extra hands on deck who can do certain specific things at a very high level. And so I started the staffing business, and it turned out to be that sunscreen and umbrella situation of sometimes the staffing business is going really great and the training business is not going as great, quite candidly. And then sometimes it flips. Yeah. So even though there have been some challenging economic times between the two sides of the business, and also, frankly, again, being just somebody who's naturally frugal, we haven't suffered.
Yeah, I think maybe I was talking with someone about this actually last night. I think maybe part of the reason that more companies don't develop in this way, having kind of two sides that will thrive in different market conditions, is because the market rewards us for doing a thing, right? So it rewards us for developing an e-learning catalog, and we're selling, courses and licenses, and it's doing really well. So we do more of that. We don't want to invest any time into the staffing piece, but then the market changes, and then we have to catch up, and we have to build that other side of the business. And so I think maybe that's part of the reason that more companies don't have a balance between the types of services they provide or the offerings that they have.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And some of it is also just the practical logistics, because sometimes, it can be painful, frankly, until you get to, maybe 20 million a year or more in revenue. It can be very painful to have two divisions that actually have different, cash flow realities and different cost realities. And
because you're only naturally thinking like, this division is not paying for itself, I'm subsidizing it.
And there have definitely been times where that has happened, in some extreme periods of time, over the years, where one part of the business was kind of subsidizing the other part of the business. But again, sometimes it has flipped. And I will say, it's not, there is that benefit of, when one business is up, the other business is down. But the other thing that's really good, of course, is the cross-selling. Anytime you run a business and you're looking to make more money, and of course, revenue growth is always wonderful. We've all heard the saying, right? There's only two ways to make more money. Have you heard this one?
Sell more or increase prices, right?
You sell. It's okay if I use slightly foul.
Sure, go for it.
You can either sell new shit to the people you're already selling to, or you take the shit you're selling and sell it to new people.
Yeah. I like your way of putting it better.
Because, and for when you have the two divisions, like the cross-selling opportunities are honestly can be very, very powerful. And I'm not even leveraging it as much as I should, honestly. But the I've absolutely had some of my biggest staffing clients came in initially as a training client, became a staffing client, and then also vice versa.
Yeah, you're more likely to keep the clients for a longer term than as you serve their needs in that moment, because then those companies, even larger companies, their needs evolve and change over time.
Yeah, but they know that we're the experts in market research and customer insights, no matter if they need training or staffing or whatever. Right. And sometimes people just call to kind of pick my brain about something, and I'm always happy to do that with my clients. I enjoy those kinds of conversations where we're really brainstorming about a real problem that they're having, whether or not it maps neatly to selling them service, training or staffing. It helps them, and it helps me to actually just think through the problems.
Now, when you went into e-learning, I'm sure you weren't envisioning one day there'll be a global pandemic and I'll be perfectly positioned for all of this. But what was your mindset like, in March of 2020, as things started to unfold, as the world started to shut down? Were you thinking, okay, I'm prepared for this? Or were there moments where you're like, oh crap, maybe I'm going to lose everything that I built?
It started off amazing.
Interesting.
It started off amazing because suddenly people were at home and we were e-learning. And so a lot of employers were telling their team, you might remember this, but when the pandemic happened, a lot of employers really became very concerned with measuring employee engagement. It became a really big thing, making sure that employees were engaged, even though they were working from home. And that's a huge topic we could talk about for hours. But a lot of that work was happening. And so the interesting thing was that then they were part of keeping their employees happy was giving them more opportunities to learn. And so a lot of our training clients actually amped up how much training they were doing because our training could be done 24/7, didn't matter where they were located. So that really helped a lot that we were already in that position. A funny thing, though, that did happen was after about 6 to 8 months, we actually saw like a burnout negative trend where it seemed like people were getting Zoom burnout.
Mm-hmm.
And so like the first 6 to 8 months of the pandemic, the e-learning business was like amazing, was booming. I felt guilty. Honestly, I felt guilty.
Yeah, because you probably knew other business owners that were really suffering during this time period. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I had friends who had business services, not in my sector, but in other areas, who literally closed their doors.
Zero. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it was, I felt guilty, like I'm doing incredibly well. But then after about 6 or 8 months, a weird thing happened where people did start to get burnt out on actually participating in some of the real-time events, because our e-learning there's mostly on-demand components, but there's also some real-time components. Because myself and the other instructors, we really believe that real-time interaction between the expert instructor and the students is a great way to really enhance learning. And after about 6 or 8 months, we started seeing the attendance of those real-time events just dropped off. People were still our students, but they started to rely solely on the on-demand content and not attending the live events anymore.
Interesting. And so, did you have any adjustments after that? There are a lot of companies that had like there's all these different curves for companies as a result of the pandemic. Some companies, went down in the months following and then it shot up, and then other companies like you shot up and then it went down. What was the, 21, 22, 23? What was that like for you?
Yeah. So I would say that the first, while we saw some changes in our customers' behavior, our revenue was actually very strong. Weirdly enough, since we're all among friends here, I will say last year, oddly, was a rough year. It was our lowest growth year that we've had. And
why do you think that was?
Well, from the analysis that I've done, some of our clients are big brands that have market research and insights teams or customer analytics teams that work with us. And some are market research agencies. And in the United States, there's over 100 market research agencies. You all have heard of the really big ones like, Ipsos and
Forrester, I guess.
Yeah, there's the really big, the big guys. But there's, 950
the smaller ones.
Size, that are like 5 people to 50 people, a lot of them. And there was a lot of consolidation there. Kind of like the trend that had started way back when I got out of being a full service agency actually started to hit for some companies worse in the last year. So that trend had been happening over all of these years, but last year was really tough. And a lot of the market research agency clients that we'd been working with, either, there was mergers and acquisitions. Some of them are just operating on a shoestring now, bare bones, just, barely surviving. And so we were a little over reliant on a few of those clients. Business 101, right? Don't let your customer base become too concentrated, because if you're, that's just puts you at risk.
All your eggs in one basket. Yeah. And then, so now we had mentioned earlier about AI and that affecting your industry, and I see you light up. You're excited about it. There's a lot of business owners that are really fearful of it. Why are you excited about it and not fearful?
I don't know. I guess I love change and I love technology. As a kid, I was a big reader of science fiction too, right? So I love
science fiction. The science fiction is here now.
Arthur C. Clarke, I'm sure is watching
looking
from
down.
afar.
Yep.
So there's, to me, the potential is just enormous. And one of the things that's so exciting is that AI makes it easy to learn about AI. So I have used different, ChatGPT and some related tools to basically say, write me an article, explain to me specifically how does one train a large language model with your subject matter expertise, whatever it is that I'm thinking about that might be useful. And I get an article, and that gets me started. So it's kind of an ironic sort of situation that it's the technology that is helping to advance the technology. But one of the things that, as soon as you get past ChatGPT, I think a lot of people get stuck on ChatGPT because it's sort of in your face all the time.
Yeah, certainly the one that's gotten the most attention. Yeah. Kicked everything off. Yeah.
I totally love it. But I think that sometimes before people learn enough about AI and generative AI and LLMs, it's very easy to have ChatGPT sort of give you sort of blinders because you think that, oh, my applications of what I can use AI for are like ChatGPT, but it's so much more than that. Mm-hmm. And so and I'm no AI expert, but just even with, reading and attending a handful of webinars and stuff, I quickly identified some opportunities. And I think that, what I find is that a lot of people are in that position of, you have some organizations that are like, we're banning it. We're too concerned about privacy. We're too concerned about our employees maybe using it in ways that actually could degrade the quality of what we're doing. So you have some companies who are just not in the game right now. And then you have this continuum of companies that are either doing really basic things that are really about individual productivity with AI. So maybe the company that does allow their employees to use ChatGPT or Hemingway or Grammarly for writing and editing and that sort of thing. And then you've got the visionaries over at the other end of the continuum, the organizations that are really thinking about, okay, well, what if I had my own LLM? What could it do? Or what are, even better is, what are the problems, that we do think we could potentially automate? What would that look like? And so another cool thing out there is that there are so many companies out there now that are doing AI-based products that just even going onto a handful of websites, I pretty quickly learned that it would be very, very feasible, almost shockingly feasible, to develop a custom LLM based on training it basically on our training content. So we've got, 26.
You can feed it in all of your e-learning courses and it can be trained on that. And then you can ask it a question. Yeah, it's amazing.
And it becomes an instructional asset. So the proof of concept that we're currently testing is basically role playing. So one of the skills, if you're going to go into market research and customer insights, has to do with research interviewing. Just like you're an excellent interviewer of guests, people have to learn how to be an excellent interviewer of consumers to get their feedback on products or brands and things like that, behaviors. And training people to be great research interviewers is hard because currently there's some certain amount of book training, but then they have to go actually start interviewing human beings and having that experience. That is a huge jump from reading a book and doing some online quizzes about what are the best practices for research interviewing to being with a real human being.
Right. But being able to train using an AI that's pretending to be a fictional, market participant, consumer, would allow them to kind of role play before they get into an actual experience.
Exactly. So now we've got an AI tool that has a few different personas. We've got different names for them. And some of the personas are chatty and friendly, and some are more difficult to interview. And so we're actually beta testing it right now, the first one. And people are, they're conducting an interview with the AI consumer. And then having that a pretty realistic experience. The conversation is very, very high quality. And then they also get instant feedback. So they're getting that sort of, these are the things you did well to establish trust. This is something you could have done better on. Here, you should have probed more because the answer that you got from the consumer was too superficial. So really enhancing the learning experience. And it's honestly, John, this is why it's going to change everything. Is not only how powerful that experience is, but how easy and inexpensive it was to develop.
And it's hard to foresee the future, but do you see humans always being the one doing the interviews, or do you see it ever getting to the point where the AI will be interviewing the consumer?
Oh, it's definitely going to be both for the foreseeable future. And some AI or AI like really more sort of Boolean logic driven based automatic interviewers have been around for years. They weren't, I think, interactive enough to to be used and really adopted widely, but clearly that's going to be happening more. And definitely some of the online qualitative platform companies are already now they're, developing along those lines. There are some concerns though, because it's going to vary a lot by who you're going to be doing the interviews with, generationally. Some people, some groups, some cohorts are going to be very comfortable being interviewed by an AI persona. Mm-hmm. Some won't.
Some might be more open to it. So others will get shut off from it, just like any human you're talking to.
Yeah, I got to tell you that the young adults I know these days, I bet a lot of them would rather talk to an AI persona than a human being.
Yeah, I mean, rightly or wrongly, I know people that have used AIs like for kind of quasi therapy, like to help them talk through or think through challenges they're going through.
Yeah, I've never done that, but I did find myself saying thank you to Siri the other day.
Yeah, they're our overlord.
I don't know. I said thank you, and I was like, wait a minute.
Why am I doing that?
Come out of my mouth.
That's funny. Well, this has been great, Kathryn. I love hearing your story and your journey in this industry. And I didn't warn you. I usually warn my guests beforehand, but I didn't warn you beforehand about my last question. But I think you can handle it. So I'm a big fan of gratitude. I'm a big fan of expressing gratitude, especially to those who helped you along the way. Especially love it when people mention peers and contemporaries. That could be others in your industry. It could be other EO members. You mentioned that as being having a big impact on your life. And I love to hear stories about that sort of thing. So are there any particular peers or contemporaries that you'd want to shout out and thank for helping you in your journey?
There are many, but for some reason, the one that's jumping right into my mind is actually a mentor I had a long time ago. It was before I started my first company. I was doing market research at Motorola, and the division was Codex. It was CODEX here in Massachusetts. And the vice president of marketing was a gentleman named Bob Stearns, who was just brilliant. And he was a great mentor to me. And he was one of those people who had a way of tricking you into realizing things for yourself. If you know what I mean.
How did he do that? I'd love to hear that.
So one of the things he did once that it's going to sound really silly, but it really was amazing. I had to make a very important decision. And he wanted me to make the decision. He was giving me this opportunity to make a big decision. And I was very young, and it was really kind of him to give me this opportunity. And so, I told him, well, it's either going to be A or B. I'd narrowed it down to A or B. And so he pulled out a coin and he goes, then if you don't have a decision, we're just going to flip the coin. He flips the coin, he peeks at it and he says, which one do you hope it is? And he was right. Because as soon as it flipped in the air, I was like, oh, B, A, B, A, B.
Interesting. That's great. That's great. I love that. That's a great tip. Kathryn, where can people go to learn more about you and Research Rockstar?
Well, first of all, I'm always happy to network with people, other entrepreneurs, other people in market research and customer insights. So you can find me on LinkedIn. I also have a video podcast series called Conversations for Research Rockstars on YouTube. It's the longest running podcast series for market research. And we have several videos now that have had over 15,000 views. It's also available as audio podcasts on your favorite audio podcasting platform. And then the company is researchrockstar.com.
Awesome, Kathryn. Thanks so much.
Thanks, John.
Thanks for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.